You remember that day more clearly than anything else in your life. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. You stood there pretending to be stronger than you felt. Your hands didn't shake, your voice didn't crack, but inside, there was a storm building that you refused to acknowledge. Fear was there. Of course it was. But you buried it under a smile, so convincing that even you almost believed it. Aisha's hand was in yours, warm, steady, real. She looked at you like you were already a hero, like you were someone who couldn't be broken. And when she told you she would wait, you didn't question it. You didn't hesitate. You let those words settle deep inside you, like a promise carved into stone. Zayn hugged you like a brother who had known you his whole life. The kind of hug that says everything without needing words. But he still said them anyway. Come back alive. Simple, direct, heavy. And you nodded like it was something you could control, like survival was just another decision you could make. In that moment, you believed them both. Not because you were naive, but because you needed to, because walking away from them without that belief would have shattered you before the war even began. And then you stepped onto that truck. That was the moment everything shifted. You didn't feel it all at once. It wasn't some dramatic snap. It was quieter than that. A slow, creeping realization that something inside you was being left behind with every step you took away from them. You kept looking back, not just with your eyes, but with your whole being, trying to hold on to that image. Aisha standing there, Zayn beside her, the life you knew still intact behind you. You told yourself you were doing this for them, that this was your purpose, that this was what it meant to be strong. But deep down, there was a voice you didn't want to hear. A voice asking a question you didn't have the courage to answer. What if you don't come back the same? You ignored it. You had to. Because the truth is, you weren't just leaving home. You were leaving the version of yourself that felt safe, understood, and whole. And some part of you knew that version wouldn't survive what was coming. That's the thing no one tells you about moments like that. They don't feel like endings when they happen. They feel like beginnings. You thought you were stepping into a chapter of bravery, of purpose, of proving something to the world. But what you were really stepping into was loss. Not just of people or places, but of certainty, of innocence, of the belief that the people you trust will always remain the same. And yet, you still sat there on that truck, holding on to hope like it was unbreakable. You believed in love. You believed in loyalty. You believed that no matter what happened out there, the world you left behind would be waiting for you exactly as it was. That belief gave you strength, but it also made you vulnerable in a way you didn't understand yet. Because life doesn't break you all at once. It waits. It lets you build something worth losing first. And as the distance between you and everything you knew kept growing, something inside you went silent. Not dead, not gone, just quiet. Like it was preparing for something you couldn't see yet. You thought that was courage, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of change. The kind of change that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that takes everything you thought was permanent and shows you just how fragile it really is. And sitting there, staring at the road ahead, you made a silent promise to yourself. You would come back, no matter what. You would return to the people who believed in you, to the life that gave you meaning. But what you didn't realize in that moment was that sometimes the hardest part isn't surviving what's ahead of you. It's facing what's left when you finally return. War didn't arrive in your life the way you imagined it would. It didn't feel like purpose. It didn't feel like honor. It hit you like noise that never stopped, like chaos that didn't care whether you understood it or not. You thought you were ready. You weren't. The first time you heard gunfire up close, it didn't sound heroic. It sounded wrong. Too sharp. Too real. And when you saw the first body drop in front of you, something inside you froze. Not your body, not your reactions, but something deeper. Something human. You kept moving because you had to. Not because you were brave, but because stopping wasn't an option. That's what war does to you. It doesn't ask who you are. It just keeps pushing until you stop recognizing yourself. Days blurred into nights, and nights turned into something even darker. Sleep wasn't rest anymore. It was escape. But even that didn't last. Because every time you closed your eyes, the faces came back. The sound came back. The moments you wished you could erase stayed. And in the middle of all that noise, there was only one thing that felt quiet. Aisha. You held on to her like she was the last piece of the world that made sense. Every message she sent felt like oxygen. Every word reminded you that there was still something waiting for you outside of all this. But then the messages slowed down. At first, you didn't question it. You told yourself she was busy. Life goes on, right? People get distracted. You made excuses for her silence because the alternative was something you couldn't afford to think about. Because if she wasn't there, then what were you holding on to? Zane's messages came in, short and simple. Everything's fine. Don't worry. Focus on yourself. And you believed him. Not because the words were convincing, but because you needed them to be true. Out there, belief wasn't about truth. It was about survival. You built a version of reality in your mind where everything was still intact, where nothing had changed, where the life you left behind was still waiting for you, untouched, because the moment you let doubt in, everything would collapse. And then came that night, the kind of night that doesn't feel real even when you're living it. The sky lit up in ways it never should. The ground shook like it was trying to throw you off it. Orders were being shouted, explosions cutting through every thought you tried to hold on to. You didn't think, you reacted, until suddenly, everything went silent. Not because the war stopped, but because your world did. You were buried. You couldn't see. You couldn't move. The weight above you pressed down like it was trying to erase you completely. Dust filled your lungs, each breath harder than the last. Panic didn't come all at once. It crept in, slow and suffocating. This is it. That thought didn't come with fear at first. It came with clarity. All the noise, all the chaos, it faded. And for the first time since you arrived there, everything became painfully simple. You didn't want to die. Not like this. Not here. And not because of fear of the unknown, but because of what you were leaving behind. Aisha's face came into your mind, clearer than anything around you. The way she looked at you that day. The way she believed in you. And suddenly, that memory didn't feel comforting anymore. It felt heavy. Because what if that version of her didn't exist anymore? Zane's voice echoed next. His words. His promise. And for a brief moment, doubt tried to break through. But you pushed it away. You had to. Because in that moment, truth didn't matter. Hope did. You realized something under that rubble that you never fully understood before. You weren't fighting for a country. You weren't fighting for pride. You weren't even fighting to prove anything. You were fighting to get back. Back to the people who gave your life meaning. Back to a version of yourself that fell whole. Every breath became a decision. Every second stretched into something unbearable. Your body was giving up, slowly, but your mind refused to follow. You held on to one thought, repeating it over and over like it was the only thing keeping you alive. I had to go back. Not for glory. Not for redemption. For them. And somewhere between that pain and that desperation, something inside you changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But permanently. You stopped being the person who thought life would wait for him. You became the person who understood that everything can disappear without warning, without explanation, without closure. And when they finally pulled you out, when air rushed back into your lungs and the world came crashing back in, you weren't the same. You were still alive, but something inside you had shifted because now you knew the truth. Life isn't something you assume will be there when you're ready. It's something you fight for, even when you're broken, buried, and one breath away from losing everything. And as you lay there, staring at a sky that suddenly felt unfamiliar, one thought refused to leave you. If you made it back, nothing would ever be the same again. At first, you didn't notice it. Time was already broken where you were. Days didn't feel like days. Weeks didn't feel real. Everything blended into one long stretch of survival, where the only thing that mattered was getting through the next moment without falling apart. So when the silence started, you told yourself it was nothing. Aisha hadn't replied in a while, but that didn't mean anything. People get busy. Life moves on back home. Not everyone is counting days the way you are. You repeated that to yourself like it was a fact, not a fragile excuse barely holding together. Because the truth was harder to face. You were waiting. Every night, after the noise faded just enough for your thoughts to get louder, you checked, hoping to see her name, hoping for something simple. Even a single word would have been enough. But nothing came, and still, you defended her in your mind. She wouldn't just disappear. She promised. You held on to those words like they were stronger than reality. Like promises couldn't break under pressure, distance, or time. Then Zane's messages started to change. At first, it was small things. The replies got shorter. The warmth disappeared. Where there used to be concern, there was now distance. Where there used to be connection, there was now something that felt forced. But you ignore that too. Because if both of them started slipping away at the same time, what did that say about everything you believed in? So you made more excuses. He's probably just stressed. Something must be going on. You kept building reasons to protect them, even when those reasons didn't feel real anymore. Because tearing them down meant standing alone in a place that was already trying to break you. You tried calling. Once. Twice. Again and again. No answer. Each unanswered call didn't just end in silence. It echoed. It left something behind. A feeling you couldn't quite explain, but couldn't ignore either. Something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong you could fix. Not the kind of wrong that comes with an explanation. The kind of wrong that sits quietly in your chest and refuses to leave. Your mind kept fighting it. They would never betray you. That sentence became your shield. You repeated it so many times that it almost lost meaning. But your heart wasn't convinced. Because silence has a way of revealing things words try to hide. You had heard gunfire. You had heard explosions. You had heard chaos so loud it shook your entire body. But this silence was worse. Because at least in war, you knew where the danger was coming from. Here, you didn't. It crept in slowly. Between thoughts. Between breaths. Turning your certainty into questions you didn't want to ask. What if something changed? What if they weren't who you thought they were anymore? What if the life you were holding on to didn't exist the way you remembered it? You try to push it away. You had to, because doubt is dangerous when you're already fighting to stay whole. It doesn't just question others. It starts to break you from the inside. So you held on tighter. To memories. To promises. To the version of them that made you feel safe. Until that message came. Zane. After days of nothing, his name finally appeared again. For a second, everything else disappeared. The noise, the fear, the weight of everything you had been carrying, it all faded. This was it. Proof that everything was still okay. Proof that you were wrong to doubt. But the moment you read it, something didn't sit right. You couldn't explain it at first. The words were normal. Simple. Nothing obviously wrong. And yet, they felt empty. Like they were written by someone who knew what to say, but not how to mean it. There was no warmth. No connection. No trace of the person you trusted like a brother. It felt distant, controlled, careful. And for the first time, you didn't rush to defend it. You read it again, slower this time, looking for something real between the lines. But all you found was space. Space where honesty should have been. Space where truth used to live. And that's when it happened. That small crack you had been avoiding finally opened. Doubt. Not loud. Not overwhelming. Just enough to change everything. Because once doubt enters, it doesn't leave the same way silence does. It stays. It grows. It starts connecting things you were trying so hard to keep separate. The silence. The distance. The missed calls. The empty words. Suddenly, they didn't feel like separate moments anymore. They felt connected. Like pieces of something you weren't ready to see. And in that moment, you realized something that hit harder than anything you had faced out there. Trust doesn't break in a single moment. It fades quietly. While you're busy convincing yourself it's still there. You stare at that message longer than you needed to. Not because you didn't understand it, but because you were afraid of what it meant. Because deep down, beneath all the excuses, all the denial, all the hope you were still holding on to, you felt it. Something had changed. And whatever it wasn't waiting for you anymore. It didn't happen slowly. One moment, everything was under control, or at least it felt like it was. The next, it was gone, replaced by something violent, unpredictable, and completely unforgiving. The attack came without warning. No time to prepare. No time to think. Just noise. Explosions tearing through the air, screams cutting deeper than anything you had heard before, and a kind of chaos that doesn't give you space to understand what's happening. You move the way you were trained to move. Fast, sharp, focused. But war doesn't care about your training. It only takes one moment, 1 second where everything shifts just enough, and suddenly you're not in control anymore. The blast hit harder than anything you had felt before. Not just physically, but internally. It shook something loose inside you. The ground disappeared beneath your feet, and before you could even process it, you were falling into darkness that didn't ask for permission. No final forte. No dramatic realization. Just nothing. And when you opened your eyes again, it wasn't to the battlefield. It was silence. A different kind of silence than the one that had been haunting you. This one was sterile, controlled, heavy in a way that pressed down on you from all sides. White walls, faint machine sounds, a ceiling that didn't move no matter how long you stared at it. A hospital. For a moment, you didn't react. You just lay there, trying to understand how you got from chaos to this stillness. Your body felt unfamiliar, heavy, slow, like it didn't fully belong to you anymore. Then the pain came, not all at once, not sharply, but deep, settled into your bones like it had made a home there. The doctor's voice cut through the quiet. You're lucky to be alive. Lucky. You heard the word, but it didn't land the way it was supposed to. It didn't feel real, because lying there, barely able to move, staring at a life that felt paused instead of saved, luck wasn't what came to your mind. You didn't feel lucky. You felt empty, like something inside you had been drained out, leaving behind a version of yourself that was still breathing, but not fully there. And in that stillness, your mind did what it had been avoiding for so long. It went back to the people you had been holding on to, back to the promises, the memories, the belief that all of this had a reason. You reached for your phone, slowly, carefully, like it carried more weight than it should. You called. No answer. Again, nothing. You stared at the screen longer than you needed to, waiting for something to change, waiting for a name to appear, for a message, for anything that could remind you that you weren't alone in this moment. But the silence stayed, and this time it didn't feel distant. It felt personal. You tried again later, then again the next day. Each attempt carried a little less hope than the last. Not because you stopped caring, but because something inside you was starting to understand what your mind had been refusing to accept. If they wanted to be there, they would be. That realization didn't come with anger. It came with something heavier. Confusion. Because nothing made sense anymore. Why wasn't Aisha there? The person who promised to wait. The person who said you were her future. In a moment like this, when you were broken, when you were barely holding on, shouldn't she have been the first one to reach you? Why wasn't Zane answering? The one who told you to come back alive. The one who called you brother. Where was he now, when you actually needed him? The questions didn't just stay in your mind. They sank deeper, into a place where pain isn't loud, but constant. Your injuries hurt. Of course they did. Every movement reminded you of what your body had been through. But that pain was simple. It had a reason, a cause, a clear explanation. This didn't. This was different. This was the kind of pain that sits in your chest and refuses to be understood. The kind that doesn't bleed, doesn't show, but somehow feels worse than anything physical. Because for the first time, you weren't just fighting to survive the outside world. You were facing something inside you that you couldn't outrun. The belief that you weren't alone started to crack. And once that belief breaks, everything else follows. You started questioning everything. Not just them, yourself. Were you wrong to trust them? Were those promises real? Or just words that felt right in the moment? Did you imagine a connection that wasn't as strong as you thought? The hospital room didn't change. The walls stayed the same. The air stayed still. But inside you, nothing was stable anymore. Because now, there was no battlefield to focus on. No noise to distract you. No immediate danger to keep your thoughts in check. Just time. Time to think. Time to feel. Time to face the silence you had been running from. And the more you sat with it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just distance. This wasn't just bad timing. Something had shifted. Something real. And lying there, unable to move the way you used to, unable to reach the people you thought would always be there. You felt it fully for the first time. Not fear, not anger, loneliness, the kind that doesn't come from being physically alone, but from realizing that the people you counted on might not be standing with you anymore. And that realization hit harder than any explosion ever could. Because out there, you're fighting enemies you could see, but here, you were fighting the possibility that you had already lost the people you were trying to survive for. And no amount of strength prepares you for that. Because this time, it didn't feel like you were fighting for something anymore. It felt like you were fighting alone. The journey back felt longer than the war itself. Not because of distance, but because of everything you were carrying inside you. Every mile brought you closer to the life you had been holding on to, the one that kept you breathing when everything else tried to take that away from you. You told yourself it was finally over. The noise, the chaos, the endless fight just to survive. Now it was time to return. Time to step back into something familiar. Something real. Something that reminded you why you endured all of it. You imagined it more times than you could count. Aisha running toward you, not caring about who was watching. Her eyes filled with relief. Her hands reaching for you, like she never let go. You held on to that image on your worst days, like it was proof that none of this pain was meaningless. And Zane, standing there with that same confident smile. Proud, steady, like a brother who never doubted you would make it back. Like nothing between you had changed. Those images felt so real that they stopped being imagination. They became expectations. That's what carried you home. But the moment you arrived, something didn't feel right. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. Just small things. Subtle shifts you couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore either. The streets looked the same. The buildings hadn't changed. But the way people looked at you had. Their eyes didn't hold the warmth you expected. There was no relief. No excitement. Just something else. Something heavier. Something that made you feel like you were walking into a story you didn't understand. You try to brush it off. Maybe you were overthinking. Maybe it was just in your head. After everything you'd been through, it made sense that things might feel different at first. But that feeling didn't go away. It followed you, step by step, until you saw it. A banner. Simple. Ordinary. Hanging in a place you had walked past 100 times before. It should have meant nothing. But it did. Because your eyes caught something and refused to look away. A name. Aisha. Your heart didn't react immediately. It paused. Like it needed a second to process what it was seeing. Like it was trying to protect you from what was about to come next. And then, another name. Zane. Everything inside you stopped. Not slowly. Not gently. All at once. Your breath caught in your chest like it didn't know how to move anymore. Your hands started shaking, but you couldn't feel them. Your body was still standing there, but it felt distant, like you were watching yourself from somewhere else. This doesn't make sense. That thought repeated in your mind, over and over, like if you said it enough, reality would correct itself. There had to be an explanation. There had to be something you were missing. Because this wasn't possible. Not them. Not like this. You took a step closer without realizing it. Your eyes scanning the banner again, searching for anything that would prove you wrong. But it didn't change. The words stayed the same. Clear, unmistakable, permanent. And in that moment, everything you had been holding on to shattered. Not cracked, not weakened, destroyed. Every message you waited for, every excuse you made, every moment you chose to believe instead of question. It all came rushing back at once. Not as memories, but as realizations. The silence, the distance, the unanswered calls. It wasn't random. It wasn't temporary. It was real. They didn't just drift away from you. They moved on without you. Your chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with injury. This wasn't physical pain. This was something deeper, something that reached into parts of you that war couldn't touch. Because out there, at least you knew who the enemy was. Here, it was the people you trusted the most, the people you survived for. You thought you knew pain. You thought you understood what it meant to lose something. But this was different. This wasn't something being taken from you. This was realizing it was already gone, while you were still fighting to hold on to it. Your knees felt weak, but you didn't fall. Not because you were strong, but because you didn't even have the strength to react. You just stood there, staring, trying to find something, anything, that could make this feel less real. But there was nothing. No explanation. No warning. No closure. Just truth. Raw. Unforgiving. Final. Everything you went through, every moment you chose to survive instead of give up, every breath you fought for under that rubble. It was all for a life that no longer existed. And that realization didn't come with anger. It came with emptiness. Because when everything you believed in disappears in a single moment, there's nothing left to hold on to. No direction, no purpose, no sense of who you are without it. Standing there, in the middle of a place that used to feel like home, you understood something you were never prepared for. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones that try to kill you. They're the ones that leave you alive, with nothing left to return to. And in that moment, you didn't feel like someone who survived. You felt like someone who lost everything. Every step toward their house felt like walking through a storm you couldn't see, but could feel in your bones. Your legs were heavy, but not from the war or the injuries. The weight was something far worse. Anticipation. Fear. A fragile hope you didn't even want to admit you were holding on to. When you reached the door, it felt smaller than you remembered. Like the world had shrunk around you, waiting for the moment you would finally see what had become of everything you fought for. You opened it, and there she was, Aisha, not as you remembered her, not in the quiet moments you had held on to in your mind. She was in wedding clothes, bright, beautiful, untouchable in a way that made your chest ache. And beside her, Zane, standing tall, smiling, the kind of proud, confident smile you thought only existed when he was welcoming you back from the battlefield. For a second, you thought you were hallucinating, that maybe this wasn't real, that maybe they were still waiting somewhere else, the way your mind had insisted for months. But it was real. Their faces froze when they saw you. Shock, confusion, maybe even fear. And that was the part that cut deeper than anything else. Not the clothes, not the ring, not the fact that they were together, but the look in their eyes, as if your survival was an inconvenience. As if your return was a complication neither of them wanted to deal with. Zane stepped forward first, trying to explain. Words came out fast, fumbling, meaningless. We thought you were dead, he stammered, like that could erase months of absence, months of silence, months of hope and longing. Aisha's tears fell freely. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. I waited as long as I could. But every word felt hollow, empty, a string of excuses masquerading as truth. Because you knew better now. You had been through enough to understand that silence is never innocent. Distance is never accidental when it matters most. And it hit you with the force of a bullet straight to your chest. They didn't wait. Not really. Not long enough. Not the way love should. The way you had waited for them, day after day, believing in them, hoping against every reality that they would hold onto you the way you held onto them. The betrayal wasn't in their actions. It was in their disbelief, in the quiet surrender of faith before the fight was even over, in the unspoken truth that the love you carried alone had never been matched. For the first time, it wasn't war or blood or pain that threatened to break you. It was realization that maybe I never truly loved you the way you love them. All the nights you imagined her running into your arms, the nights you imagined Zane waiting for you, had been your imagination carrying the weight of their absence. They had moved on the moment they thought you were gone. And the most unbearable part? They acted as if your survival was a mistake. As if your life, your return, didn't matter in the story they had written without you. You could see in their eyes now, the awkward guilt, the forced sorrow, the shock that you were still here. But none of it reached the depth of the pain you felt. None of it could reach the part of you that had been holding on, counting days, imagining a life where their presence would greet you the way you deserved. You wanted to shout, to shake them, to demand that they see you, see what you went through, see the scars that ran deeper than the ones on your body. But no words came, not because you didn't have them, but because the truth was louder than any shouting. They had chosen a life without you. And that choice was made in the quiet months you thought were filled with faith, in the silence you had excused, believing in promises that didn't exist. Every memory of hope, every message you had sent, Every night you stayed awake thinking of their faces. Now it all felt like it had been feeding a lie. And in that moment, as you stood there, looking at them, the people you had risked everything for, you understood something brutally clear. Love isn't just about feeling. It's about endurance, about belief, about waiting when nothing guarantees return. They hadn't waited. They hadn't believed. And that meant they hadn't loved you the way you loved them. The war had taught you how to survive, how to fight, how to hold on when the world wanted to tear you apart. But nothing had prepared you for this. This was a different kind of battle, one that left no enemies to defeat, only truths to face. And as you stepped back, your chest tight with grief and disbelief, you realized something that would never leave you. Surviving wasn't enough. Sometimes, surviving means learning that the people you trusted most weren't worth the faith you placed in them. And that realization, that betrayal, broke you in a way no battlefield ever could. You didn't speak. You didn't argue. You didn't demand explanations. You simply walked away. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of distance, but because of weight you carried inside. The weight of everything that had been taken from you. The love you thought would wait. The friend who should have had your back. The life you had imagined for yourself. All of it gone. Erased. Leaving nothing but a hollow echo where your heart used to be. For weeks, you withdrew. Not because you wanted to hide, but because the world felt unsafe. Not the war, not the streets, not even the familiar city around you. Your mind had become a battlefield of its own. Anger, grief, disbelief, they all collided inside, leaving you raw and exposed. Sleep became a refuge and a prison. Silence became both a comfort and a torment. You felt broken, angry, empty, and for a long time, you allowed yourself to sit in it. You thought that was all there was left for you, that surviving the war had been pointless if this betrayal, this loss, this emptiness was the end. But then, slowly, something began to stir. It didn't come as a flash of revelation. It didn't arrive with a dramatic thunderclap. It came quietly, subtly, a whisper inside that refused to be ignored. You survived everything else. You could survive this too. And for the first time in months, you considered that maybe survival wasn't about holding on to what you had lost. Maybe it was about what you could still become. You started small. Physical movement at first, pushing your body to remember strength and endurance. Every push, every lift, every step reminded you that you were alive. That despite everything, your body still responded. Your mind still functioned. And slowly, the broken pieces inside you began to shift. Rebuilding wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. Pain lingered in your chest, in your arms, in the memory of everything that had hurt you. But each day, you chipped away at the emptiness. Each day, you forced yourself to confront reality without excuses, without hiding. You learned to sit with your anger without letting it define you. You allowed your grief to exist without letting it consume you. And as the weeks turned into months, you realized something that surprised you. You were changing. Not in the ways you expected. Not into someone softer or more hopeful. You were becoming sharper, stronger, colder, yes, but not in cruelty. In clarity, awareness. You learned to see the world without the illusions you once clung to trust yourself instead of waiting for others, to measure strength not by who stood by you, but by who you became when no one did. The war had already taught you survival. Betrayal taught you something different, endurance of the soul, the capacity to take every cut, every loss, every deceit, and still stand, still breathe, still exist as something more than broken. You were no longer the man who believed love and friendship would always protect him. You were no longer the man who imagined a life that could be given to you by others. You were your own foundation now, your own certainty, your own power. People who once mattered might never understand what you had survived. But that didn't matter anymore. You didn't need validation. You didn't need forgiveness. You didn't need anyone to explain why they left or why they betrayed you. The only person whose faith mattered now was yourself. And in that realization, you felt an unfamiliar weight lift. Not all of it. Not entirely. The scars, both visible and hidden, would always remain. But the burden of expectation, of dependency, of heartbreak controlled no more. You were not just surviving anymore. You were living deliberately, fiercely, intentionally. Every choice you made, every step forward, every battle with your own demons reinforced a simple truth. You had endured hell and returned to stand on your own. And the man you became after losing everything. He was stronger. Colder, yes, but wiser. Sharper, yes, but self-aware. Broken in parts, yes, but unyielding in spirit. You had faced betrayal, war, loss, and the collapse of everything you thought defined your life. And you had emerged. Alone, yes, but whole in a way you never imagined possible before. You were no longer defined by what you lost. You were defined by the man who refused to be destroyed by it. Time moved on, whether you wanted it to or not. You didn't chase it. You didn't fight it. You simply let it carry you forward, one day at a time, slowly shaping the life you were determined to reclaim. You threw yourself into your work, your goals, your own survival, but in a different sense now. Not just to live, but to build something meaningful. Something that belonged to you and no one else. Every project, every effort, every late night reminded you that the world could take away people, love, trust, but it could never take what you created with your own hands. And in those months, maybe even years, you felt yourself returning. Not the man you were before the war. Not the one who believed in promises without proof. But a version stronger, steadier, unshaken by hope or disappointment. The man who knew the value of himself before anyone else could validate it. Then, one day, the news came. Not directly, not as a confrontation. Just a whisper, a casual mention from someone who didn't know or care about how it would land. Zayn and Aisha, their marriage. The details were simple, strained, full of arguments, regret, trust issues that ran so deep that neither of them seemed able to escape it. You didn't react the way you thought you would. There was no surge of satisfaction, no revengeful glee, no gaping wound reopening in your chest. There was nothing, and that nothing told you everything. For the first time, you realized that you had truly let go. Not because they suffered, but because their story no longer mattered to you. You weren't counting their days, following their lives, or imagining what could have been. You had lived through betrayal, survived war, and rebuilt yourself from the ruins of everything you thought was permanent. You didn't need their downfall to feel whole. You understood, finally, that karma doesn't always need an audience. It doesn't need your prayers, your bitterness, or your anger to take its course. It moves quietly, slowly, without malice, without fanfare. Life has its own way of balancing things that can't be rushed, manipulated, or forced. And in that quiet understanding, you felt the last weight lift off your chest. The weight of waiting, the weight of hoping, the weight of resentment. All gone. Because when you stop clinging, when you stop needing life to answer your grievances, peace isn't loud. It's simply there, settling into the spaces you never knew were empty. You weren't happy for their misfortune. You weren't gloating. There was no victory in it. But there was clarity, a calm that comes from knowing you've survived the storm and no longer carry its debris in your soul. You had earned this detachment, not by force, but by endurance, by resilience, by the painful understanding that life goes on, with or without you. And that's when it hit you. Freedom isn't about taking back what was lost. Freedom isn't about revenge or closure. Freedom is about no longer being tethered to the people or events that once broke you. Freedom is existing without expectation, without pain, without the invisible chains of what could have been. You were living proof that survival and growth could coexist. That heartbreak could evolve into wisdom. That loss could transform into understanding. Karma didn't need your help. Life had already done its work. And you didn't need to witness it. You didn't need to take pleasure in it. You only needed to exist beyond it, fully, deliberately, and untouchably whole. For the first time in years, you looked at yourself, not with longing, not with regret, not with pain, but with quiet acknowledgement. You had endured, you had rebuilt, and you had become a man untouched by the failures of others. And in that quiet moment, you realized something profound. Letting go isn't passive. It's a victory. Not over others, but over the part of yourself that once thought you needed them to survive. You had survived betrayal, loss, war, and heartbreak. And now, finally, you were free. Karma had done its part. You had done yours. She appeared one afternoon, unannounced. Not with fanfare, not with demands, just her presence at the edge of your world, fragile and hesitant. You barely recognized her at first. The brightness in her eyes was gone. Her shoulders slumped as if carrying invisible weights. Tired, worn, full of regret. She didn't try to justify herself. She didn't make excuses. She only spoke the words that had been waiting inside her for who knows how long. I made the biggest mistake of my life, she said, voice trembling, raw with sorrow. I'm so sorry for everything. You listened, quietly, without interruption, without reaction. For years, you had imagined this moment in countless ways. Anger, revenge, confrontation, but none of them came. The reality wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm. Uneasy, yes, but calm. And in that calm, you realized something important. You didn't hate her anymore. That fire you once imagined would consume, you had died long ago. Burned out by time, survival, and the rebuilding of yourself. But neither did you love her. That part of you, the part that had held on to hope, that had imagined a life together, that had fought to survive for her, was gone. It didn't exist anymore. It had been replaced by something clearer, understanding, acknowledgement, closure. When you spoke, your voice was steady. Your words precise, final. I forgive you, you said, and you meant it. Not to absolve her, not to reconcile, but to release yourself. To close a wound that had lasted far too long. But I can't go back, you added. That chapter, it's over. Saying it aloud for the first time was like letting air into lungs that had been holding pain for years. It wasn't easy. It didn't come without echoes of the past. But as you said it, you felt the weight lift, subtle and profound. The chains of expectation, of longing, of unanswered questions, they all fell away. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. And in that silence, you both understood what words couldn't fully capture. There was no reconciliation here. No path back. Only acknowledgement. Only truth. You realized that freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of a decision that no one else can make for you. Sometimes it comes in saying no, in letting go, in accepting that the people who hurt you, intentionally or not, cannot be a part of your future. That day, you were free. Free from regret. Free from longing. Free from a story that had once defined you. Aisha left. You watched her go, not with bitterness, not with sadness, but with a calm that surprised you. You had survived love lost, betrayal, war, and heartbreak. You had rebuilt yourself from the ruins. And now, at last, you had the closure you had been waiting for all along. The chapter was over. And for the first time in years, you felt what true freedom really was. Looking back now, you see it clearly. Not just the war, the chaos, the noise, the moments when death felt inevitable, but everything that came after. Betrayal, heartbreak, loss. The kind that doesn't leave scars you can see, but lives in the way your chest tightens, the way your mind whispers doubts you don't dare speak aloud. You survived all of it. Every wound, every betrayal, every cruel twist of life that should have broken you, you endured. And in surviving, something unexpected happened. Something quiet, slow, but unstoppable. You found yourself. It wasn't easy. It never is. Survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about standing up when every part of you wants to fall. It's about facing the truth that the people you trusted most could abandon you and still choosing to rise. It's about looking at the ruins of the life you thought you'd have and deciding you would build something better anyway. And that's what you did. Piece by piece, day by day, you rebuilt. You strengthened your body, sharpened your mind, and hardened your heart. Not into something bitter, but into something aware, capable, unshakable. You became someone who could endure the storm and still see the sky when it cleared. You realized that pain doesn't have to be the end of a story. It can be the beginning. Every loss, every betrayal, every moment when it felt like nothing was left to fight for, it became fuel. Lessons carved into your bones, shaping you into someone wiser, stronger, and unbreakable. And in that strength, you discovered freedom. Freedom from waiting. Freedom from hope tied to others. Freedom from the expectation that anyone could define your worth, your life, or your future. You no longer needed anyone else to validate your survival. You validated it yourself. Now, you're different. Not just a survivor of what life threw at you, but someone who commands your own life. Someone who understands that everything you endured, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the loss, didn't weaken you. It built you. You're not defined by what was taken from you. You are defined by how you chose to rise after it. Your story didn't end with pain. It began with it. And that beginning gave you clarity, gave you resilience, gave you the understanding that life doesn't wait for those who hesitate. It rewards the ones who take their broken pieces and turn them into something unstoppable. Looking ahead, you see a life waiting for you, one you can shape with intention, one you can step into without fear, without hesitation, and without compromise. A life where you never lose yourself again, where your strength isn't measured by what you survive, but by the person you've become because of it. And in that moment, you know it. Not as a fleeting thought, not as a wish, but as truth. You survived. You endured. You became stronger. Everything you lost, it led you here, to a life that is entirely yours. A life built not on illusions or promises, but on the unshakable foundation of who you are now. And for the first time, the future doesn't scare you. It excites you, because you know that no matter what comes next, you are ready, unbroken, whole, and stronger than anything that tried to take you down.